All right, hello, and welcome back to Everybody Climbs, your adaptive climbing podcast series. This is a special collaborative podcast with Plugtone Audio, Power Company Climbing, and Sends and Suffers podcast. This is the final episode with me, Emily Chen-Newton, as your host. If you're interested in being the new host and carrying on the torch/mic, reach out to EveryBD Climbs on Instagram. That's every, then the letter B, the letter D, Climbs on Instagram. Now, in keeping with our themes of community built and community led, this episode features 3 truly incredible blind athletes leading the conversation. I take a step back from the mic as Justin Salas, Seneida Biendarra, and Chaz Misuraca carry us through a conversation about each of their unique and ongoing journeys with vision loss and how climbing, both the sport and the community, supports them and pushes them along the way. Seneida is a 4-time paraclimbing multi-medalist and works for Black Diamond as a soft goods product developer. Justin is known for his remarkable athletic achievements, including being the first blind climber to complete a V11 boulder problem. And Chaz is not only a climber, but a blind hockey player. In fact, he reps the Canadian national teams for both paraclimbing and hockey. And I'll let them explain their vision loss in their own words. That's where we'll pick up the conversation, talking about losing sight, but finding climbing.
I'm Chaz Misuraca. I'm a Canadian paraclimber. So the way it works for me, I have a hereditary disease called LHON, stands for Leber's Hereditary Optic Neuropathy. In February of 2018, I started losing sight in my left eye. And then by September of 2018, my right eye had caught up. And in July of that year, late June, I had met a woman who then, her and I started to date. And then she, told me maybe a week or two after dating her that if I want to continue to date her, I better learn how to rock climb and enjoy it because that's all that she does. And that's the only way we would work. So then, and at that point, my whole life had been kind of turned upside down. And I can only really focus on things that I used to be able to do fairly easy and how hard everything was, where with rock climbing, I didn't have a baseline to compare it to. So I think that's why I really took to it, because I wasn't just sitting there being like, oh, this is so hard compared to, as Justin and I talked before about brushing your teeth. People don't understand trying to put toothpaste on a toothbrush. And I would wake up in the mornings and I would cry because I'd be like, this fucking sucks. So I don't know if we can swear or not in this.
Yeah, you can. It's fine.
Okay. Because, I struggle so hard doing something that I wouldn't even think twice about doing in the past. And then with climbing, I didn't have any comparison. So it was fairly easy. And then also it gave me an excuse to get outside into nature, which I really enjoyed doing. And yeah, so that's a brief explanation on how I got into climbing. And my sight loss leaves me seeing with no central vision. So kind of think of looking through some fogged up ski glasses or your windshield in the morning or a mirror after you've had a shower. Or I've also think of it as if you're swimming underwater without goggles on, you can kind of see your hand in front of you, but you can't necessarily see, how many fingers you're holding up on it. And yeah, that's sort of how I navigate through the world in a bit of a fog, we'll say.
Justin?
Sure. So my name is Justin Salas. I'm 31 from Tulsa, Oklahoma originally. I live in Las Vegas now. So it's been remarkably hot lately. But I have very similar vision to Chaz, actually. So Seneida calls it donut vision, which I freaking love. So it's like the antithesis to tunnel vision. Nothing in the middle or very little in the middle. I have a little bit of light and contrast discernment in the middle, but my peripheral vision works well to some extent. However, before my vision loss, I needed to wear glasses. So the lenses of the eyes themselves still need to be corrected, but I don't wear the glasses any longer. And I'm sure anybody who's visually impaired would understand when you're zooming with your phone or you're sticking your nose up to something to try and figure out what it is, someone will most likely ask you, have you tried glasses? And I always describe it as though, no, it's like if you had a camera, the lens itself is fine, but the sensor that the lens is projecting the image onto is damaged. So glasses don't help. That's kind of the fundamental issue when it comes to optic nerve diseases. However, mine is undiagnosed. It's an optic neuropathy of unknown origin. So they don't actually know what it's attributed to, which I guess makes me a bit of a unicorn.
And how did you get into climbing?
Oh, yeah, that part. So I've always been, like, I've had a proclivity towards sports in general, like soccer, BMX, weightlifting, that kind of stuff. And so I was trying to do those things after I had lost my sight at 14 to a certain degree of failure every time. But it was probably my stubborn nature that was like, no, you can still do these things that you once did. So just keep trying. But it wasn't until someone introduced me to climbing and was like, no, you don't need to see to climb. Come try it. And kind of begrudgingly, I went, and they were right. Like, with the help of individuals at the gym that were able to tell me where footholds were, where handholds were, and kind of give me the proverbial spray down, then I was really surprised that it didn't seem like there were quite as many or any roadblocks at all with climbing. Whereas, like with BMX, I would literally run into things all the time.
And Seneida?
So I'm Seneida Biendarra, 27. I'm from Sheboygan, Wisconsin originally, and I recently moved to Salt Lake 2 years ago. I work at Black Diamond. I'm a product developer there. And then additionally, I have sight loss. So I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, and that caused my vision to deteriorate around the age of 17, from a normal person's vision where you have 180 degrees of vision down to the point where now I only have 5 degrees of central vision. So if Chaz and Justin have donut vision, I have donut hole vision, because they can see the outside ring and I can only see the middle. So I like to think that, if all 3 of us were put in a car with 3 steering wheels, we'd be able to drive. But it would take quite the engineer to come up with a way for us to actually test that. So similar to what Chaz was talking about, I never had a baseline for how hard climbing would be during my sight loss, because I actually started losing my vision around the same time that I started rock climbing. So it's one of those things that's always kind of been integrated in my life. I think it was a bit of a balance of, life is getting harder, like everyday things, like Chaz is saying with the toothbrush. I don't have that same challenge because I can see clearly in the center of my vision, but the rest of the world doesn't exist to me. So I live life with incomplete information. I'm trying to make sense of how many cars are on the street by looking through a tiny little straw, like a tiny little periscope of vision. And that's how I see the world. And so many parts of my life felt a lot harder. And that's something that makes you just feel really challenged and less capable. But at the same time, if you're going out and you're climbing rocks and you're able to do something just as hard as your friends, it really boosts your emotional self-confidence, because you feel like, you know what, so what if that basic task is hard for me, I can get on top of this 100-foot cliff and stand at the top of it and see something that very few other people get to see. So rock climbing came to me when I was in college. My freshman year of college, I was walking down the hallway and saw a poster that said, what happens to waterfalls in winter? Do you want to find out? And so my first time climbing was actually on ice. We went to this little ice pillar on the banks of the Mississippi and pulled out the ice tools and the crampons and just, threw a tantrum on the ice. You're kicking, you're thrashing, you're throwing your tools at the ice. And it's so fun. And I was hooked from that moment. And so that spring and that summer, I found rock climbing, and I've been a rock climber ever since.
That's awesome. Justin, we've talked more about how you started climbing, but I did not know the origin stories of Chaz and Seneida. And I think that's funny. You know, I know a lot of women who got into climbing because a boyfriend was a climber and then stayed after the breakup. But I didn't know that's how you got into climbing, Chaz. That's awesome.
Well, and I kind of mentioned how it was July we met, but I didn't go completely blind or like to where I am now with my blindness till September. But when I'd met her, I broke my ankle the weekend beforehand. I used to be a bit of a drinker, and I had done a backflip off of a riding bull at a bar and landed on my foot perfectly, but it ended up breaking my one bone. So I was in a cast, and then so she let me slide with not climbing for a while. And then I would go to the gym and only climb like V0s, which was fairly easy because I didn't want to fall. And that's when she then said to me, like, once you heal, you need to be able to take this more seriously because, all I do on the weekends is rock climb, and basically I need to be able to keep up. Like she would literally like piggyback me around the gym at times just so I could get to and from certain climbs. So I could, continue to practice climbing. And like I said, I really enjoyed the act of it and being physical because kind of like Seneida had said about not feeling capable of doing things. I think it's also like prior to this, Justin and I were talking about because I just had surgery, and I think why I'm having a bit of a hard time now is because I'm not out doing these things that make me feel extra capable. Because especially I live in Stratford, Ontario, where there's no mountains around. Rock climbing is starting to develop here a little more, but very few people climb. So I'm capable of doing things that most of the people I come in contact with don't do. So it really helps. I don't know, you want to call it like boosting your ego or self-worth, however you want to word that. And since I can't do that right now, it's kind of, I don't know, playing a bit of a toll on, we'll say, my mental health as I have to rebuild myself to be able to get back to the state of being able to push myself to go and climb these rocks and such that bring me so much joy. And yeah, like now I live a lot of my life dealing with all the things that are really difficult for me to do that necessarily wouldn't in the past. So I'm just itching to get back out on some rock to be able to prove to myself that I am a very capable human being, which I find a lot of that comes through rock climbing.
Oh yeah, totally. It's pretty awesome just to be able to, deal with vision loss, and then you're keen on somebody, so they're like, you need to step up, and you're like not shying away from it, but instead being like, I'll show you stepping up to it. Like I'm gonna do everything that you do with vision loss and absolutely annihilate it. So I think that's pretty sick. I also wanted to just touch on what Seneida said. I feel like you have to be like a special kind of hardcore person to be going through vision loss and then get introduced to climbing via ice climbing and still fall in love with it.
I do think
that's intense.
Ice climbing is maybe even more conducive for blind climbers than normal climbing because it is so based in just like repetition and like testing the ice. And you can like there is a bit of like movement around the pillars and the features of the ice, but for the most part you're making your own like handholds and you're making your own footholds through the crampons and the ice tools that you're using. And so if you're given a like a flat sheet of ice, like it's all about the technique. You don't even need to see. So I thought that was like really cool. Whereas if you're in a gym and you're like locked off on something and you're desperately trying to find that one handhold that's just your savior, like you would rarely come across a situation like that if you're on some pretty fat ice because you just like throw your tool up and find a nice spot to sink it.
I definitely did notice that. It's almost like it's liberating in a sense. Like you don't have to worry about where your next hold is as long as you know that feeling of that ice tool, like actually sinking into the ice in a solid way. You're usually pretty good. I have found the limited ice climbing I have done.
I know nothing about ice climbing because I hate being cold. But is it, it has a lot to do with the feel, and like I would kind of assume the sound too. Is there a sound element, like of hearing a good hold when you put the pick in?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the denser ice is going to make a different sound. Like ideally, visually, you can inspect where you sink your tool by like little divots in the ice, and that's where like the denser, the harder ice is going to be. But also, yeah, you can kind of tell the difference between like a tinny, like hollow sound and like a deeper, like thunk. So yeah, as long as you get your 1/4 inch in the ice, like, and it's over time, like building up trust, kind of like we build up trust in our ability to climb at a certain level, or to like hold a certain kind of hold for an amount of time. Once you get used to the feeling of what it is to be solid on ice, then you kind of like build on that base, and you're able to kind of like do steeper and steeper things more comfortably.
Well, this is kind of related to one of the questions that I had written down I wanted to talk about was if there are any ways that you feel that vision loss actually helps in climbing.
For sure it does.
I think it's an advantage when you're starting out.
Okay.
Like,
Do you guys
especially,
think it's like through the strength or the mental gains? Because I'd love for you guys to talk about your mental game in addition to just like the strength aspect of it.
I would say,
Ooh.
while lead climbing, I have this conversation in my head at times when you're like above your bolt and you're gonna take a big whip or something. I lie to myself and I'm just like, dude, the bolt's at your feet. Like, quit being a little wussy. You're not even gonna fall that far. I can't look down to be like, no, it's not, dude. Like, it's like way down there. So because I can't look down to see how far I'm gonna fall, it really helps with not even paying attention to the fall.
That's really see. I'm always telling myself I need to harness my inner Tasmanian devil so I have more boldness on the rock. Because I have been in those situations as well. I mean, like any Seneida, Chaz, or any blind climber probably has been in a situation where you're like, they'll run out past your last piece of protection or your bolt, and you don't know where the next one's going to be, and you're kind of in that in between state where you start questioning yourself. Are you getting close to the bolt? Is it coming up? Have I passed it yet? Like, where am I? And I remember very specifically, I just recently moved back to Vegas in February, and it was like the month after we had moved into our home. We went climbing, and we went to the like quote unquote 5'9". It was like 120 feet tall. And I got to the top and I was at the penultimate bolt, but to clip the anchors, it was like 30 or 40 feet run out, and you're like moving between these huge ledges. And at one point you have to traverse and you're already like 35 feet run out. And I just remember thinking like, I don't know where I'm going. Like, I don't know what the holds are going to be like up there. It's starting to turn into slab. It's all super sketchy. So those are the moments where I think there's like some pretty big mental fortitude, like level ups where you're just trying to make sure that you're okay and stay calm. I'm like literally telling myself like, you're not allowed to fall. You're not allowed to fall. Like, if you fall, it's going to be horrendous. So like, this is not the opportunity. And I just remember clipping the chains after like finally figuring it out after like an hour or something on the wall, that I was like, I hate this. Like, it's like those moments where you get through and you're just like, that was horrible.
It's like there's this constant nagging at the back of your mind that it's like you're using the information that you have to the best of your ability, but you're still going off of incomplete information and making decisions that could affect your safety. But eventually, like, deciding like the best thing that I can do is to just keep moving forward along this like path that I've already selected. So sometimes the gamble pays off, and sometimes you end up a little bit edged out or scared, and you have to decide, okay, do I go back to a retreat, or do I double down again and keep going forward? And I think that's something that blind climbers probably experience a lot more than the average climber, that I think probably also feeds into our ability. I think like witnessing YouTube climb and like thinking about my own climbing, sometimes all it takes is just doubling down on like, no, I have to make it through this. I don't have a way to retreat, and I'm not going to fall. I'm just going to keep going. And it forces you to trust yourself with your own safety and take things into your own hands and keep climbing.
Well, that makes me think, like, fundamentally speaking, is this moment in which we're like questing into the unknown, we're trying to assess a dangerous situation with incomplete data. Is it actually rational, or are we rationally afraid of the irrational fear because there are nuances to moving through terrain with incomplete data, and you could pass that bolt and you would never know. You would, like, I recently did that on a route. I passed a bolt on like this head wall, and I was like well more run out than I should have been. And if I would have fallen, it could have been pretty bad. And I didn't even know there was a bolt up there. And April was like, "Why didn't you clip that last bolt?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know it was there."
But does that fear feel more useful to you than the fear you feel when you're crossing the street and you're not sure if a car is coming?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I don't.
Okay, so there's fear in climbing, but it serves a purpose, right? When we're crossing the street, when blind people are going out in the world, or they're biking or getting through the world in an urban setting, we take all sorts of these same risks, and we feel that fear constantly, but not necessarily in a useful way, you know?
I feel like for me, it's been like this maybe stubborn, almost resentment. Like, I don't know, my mental space towards my vision loss has probably not been like as well attuned as it could be. I think I'm still working through a lot of these nuances of like not being able to drive throughout my whole life. So one of the things that I've leaned into is like, I do all this for the sake of like independence, and that like it fills me with like a sense of accomplishment, even if I'm just able to like make it into the middle of town or whatever, just completely unassisted. So I think, and as it pertains to climbing, it's like being able to push beyond that like sense of what I am trying to rationalize as realistic concern about moving into terrain I have no idea what I'm doing. It's like, I don't want to have to take and then go back down and have someone put it up for me. It's like, I would rather fall. And I mean, you know, no one's perfect. Like, I often have moments where I hit just the absolute limit mentally. And it's like, I need someone to like either aid through the section I was struggling with, or like help me memorize it a little bit more in depth.
And yeah, like there's also times do have a huge run out, and if I know it has been, you know, there's times there's like 30 feet of a run out, and so then I just counter that with, it must be really easy, or someone would have put a bolt here. But then there was a time you get to a slab, and the last time this had happened is the worst time for me. I was in like the New River Gorge, and I'm on this climb, and you know, it was a 4-star route, and then I'm up past this point, and it kind of come over a lip. So my friend that was, you know, helping call out where bolts are for me, she couldn't see me, and I'm at this point, and I'm like kind of freaking out. And I know I'm at a point where if I do just fall, it's going to be a really bad fall, because I've had to take a pretty big traverse, and I can't just lie to myself then, because I need to be able to try to figure things out. And if I do fall, it's going to be a huge swing and not a good situation. So I'm like calling down to other people I don't know on the ground, man, does anyone know where the anchor is? And then people are like, yeah, like it says here, like move up and left type of thing. And it's just like, well, that's not helpful. It's like up and left 10 feet, up and left, you know, at like 20 degrees. So things like that are really shitty situations. That's why I think I really enjoy when people climb the route first and hang draws, because I use like high contrast colored draws. And sure, I can't see maybe which way the gate's facing, but I have, if someone were to say up and left, I could scan around, and like I've learned to use, you know, my eyes like left, right, up, down. I move around, and I can maybe not see something clearly, but I know where I'm supposed to be going, and it helps counter that. But when you're hanging the draws, mostly I'll ask someone on the ground, can you see all my bolts? And if they say no, then I more than likely ask them to climb first. Because I've had the situation, I was actually in Las Vegas as well, and someone was getting rescued by a helicopter over top of us, and I was leading a route and hanging draws, and I climbed past a couple bolts, and my girlfriend at the time was like yelling at me, telling me there was a bolt there, and I couldn't hear her. And then it was so close to me that she assumed I was passing it for a reason. And the next thing you know, I got flash pumped and I fell. And luckily, she had like taken in a lot of rope and ran away from the wall, because I came like a foot away from decking. And she was like, "Why'd you climb past those bolts?" And I'm like, "What bolts?" She's like, "Well, like the 3 bolts you climb by." And I'd only had, luckily, she had stick clipped the second bolt for me. Otherwise, I would have completely decked. And I was just like, shit, like I didn't know there was bolts there. She's like, "Well, I was yelling at you and I couldn't hear you." And that was like before I even had headsets and stuff like that. And I can also lead into that with the crossing the street. I feel like with climbing, I don't freak out as much as I do while crossing a road, let alone a busy intersection.
Hmm.
because the results of me getting hit by a car are going to be a lot worse than me taking a whip. Sure,
Yeah.
you could get
And
hurt
it's
with both of
not
them.
always within your own ability to defend yourselves. Like you could be crossing the road when the signal tells you to cross, and someone might just not be paying attention.
Seneida, didn't you just recently have an incident with a car?
Yeah, I got hit by a car while I was biking to work.
Dude, I have not had a chance to ask you about it, but I'm really curious. First of all, I'm very thankful that you're okay and in good health after that. What happened?
Yeah, so I do bike to work, and it's like a 7-mile bike ride each way. And I have like the central vision that I need to see ahead of me to, see if traffic's oncoming or if there's any cars that are pulling into intersections. But what happened in this case is I was biking down the middle of a residential road and someone was coming out of an elevated driveway. They were backing out and essentially just released the brake and rolled out quietly. So I couldn't hear that there was
Oh,
a car
God.
coming. And they were coming out of a blind driveway. So they had no real way to see me either. And they just hit me with the back of their car as they
Oh,
were
my
rolling out
gosh.
their
Dang.
driveway, like right in the side.
I just want to
So
qualify Seneida's riding ability quickly. We did a 80-mile bike packing trip in the backcountry of Utah. She is an extremely talented rider. So I like for all the people listening that are going to be like, "Oh, blind people shouldn't be riding their bikes to work anyway." It's like, fuck that. Like Seneida's really good at riding. So these are those moments that you just can't prepare for.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I've always kind of wondered when this would happen, but mentally, like how I've kind of dealt with this is thinking about, even if I could see, like this person rolled into me from the side at a quick enough pace that even if I could see, I probably wouldn't have time to react. And so I think if it were the case of, I biked into someone or like I didn't see something coming at me and because of my vision, I had an incident, I think I'd have a bit more of a mental block with continuing to bike. And maybe this is just part of like the blind way of creating these like circles of self-reinforcement to assure yourself like, actually, no, I can continue doing this and it is still safe. But I feel pretty good still nowadays, like
That's awesome.
biking to
Yeah,
work after this.
it's always like the getting back on the horse, so to say. Those moments, like, that's just how it is. You just got to keep
Yeah.
going. And I think that's true for, I guess, anybody that does like motorcycle, cycling, anything like that. It's like there's two types of riders in the world: the ones that have gone down, and the ones that will go down.
Hearing you guys talk about some of these things, not so much climbing, but life, makes me think about the way that I've often related to whitewater, in that I find it terrifying because I can't see anything that is below the water and it feels really out of my control. And so rock climbing has always felt safer and more like of a controlled environment. I used to live in Fayetteville, or in the West Virginia, Fayetteville area, and you'd have this distinction between like the rock people and the river people. And I was just like, you river people are crazy. Like, how do you go out there every day on this thing that like you can't see it? You don't know what it's going to do to you. But that's like kind of life for you guys.
Yeah.
Totally.
The first sport I did was whitewater, and I still maintain that whitewater is much scarier than climbing. And yeah, it's like you're at the will of this big wall of water that doesn't care what you're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you fall on a rock, you're gonna like there's one fall, one action, done. I don't whitewater, but if you fall off your kayak or raft, it's not like you then hit the water and now it's done. That's when your
now you have to deal
adventure,
with the scary,
yeah,
dangerous
your
part.
adventure just started at that point because you now have to deal with what's about to come, and it ain't gonna end. Rivers don't just stop.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sinead, after you get hit by the car when you're riding your bicycle, have you been back on your bike again? And if so, what was it like getting back on? Like, was it terrifying riding it again, or was it just like nothing?
I think like I bike out of necessity, right? So it's probably similar to what people who are in car crashes feel like when they're back in the car for the first time. I mean, like it makes me doubt my ability to make like decisions while I'm biking, because I'm looking and scanning back and forth and being as vigilant as I can while I'm checking for cars and listening. Like I actually use my hearing a fair amount to actually be certain that like, okay, I don't see any cars, but also I don't hear anything. So it's not like I only use my hearing, but it is a reinforcement of like my decision to now is the time to cross the street or keep going. So I was pretty severely concussed from the accident. I couldn't climb for over a month without like having some pretty bad headaches. But only like a couple weeks after I started biking again, this is probably not the best decision, but it was because I needed to get places.
Mm-hmm.
And so at first, I just kind of felt like I think what many people have felt dealing with vision loss, where it's like, I shouldn't have to deal with this. Like, this isn't something that other people are subject to. Like, I'm putting myself in danger now again, simply because the public transportation in my region is really poor. And if I want to get to work on time, I have to take things into my own hands. And so I didn't necessarily feel fear for myself, just frustration for the situation that I was in. And then another couple weeks passed, and then it was like actually something I was thinking about a lot. I was like, well, if I could have gotten hit by a car while I was being so vigilant, like what else could happen? Like I've had dozens of near misses in the past, but nothing actually bad has happened. And so even though I was able to like get up right afterwards and walk away, I still kind of feel like the effects of the concussion, like in terms of just like brain fog. And like sometimes it does, I think, affect my vision. So
that's really interesting.
I think it's something people don't think about, because you said like you do it out of necessity. So like I won't ride a bike unless I'm like with someone else, because I have a hard time going slow, and I'm just, you go so quick on a bike. So like I remember last summer, I think it was, Justin, you ran into a big orange construction sign. And I'm thinking like, how the hell do you do that? And then I was on your bike, and it goes, correct me if I'm wrong, 30 miles an hour.
Yeah,
or whatever.
it goes really fast.
And I'm on that ripping around. And I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, yeah, I'd be fucking hitting something too if I was on this thing all the time. So that's why like I rollerblade or I run everywhere I go, just because I can only go so fast. But then the downside of that is you're exhausted all the time. Like my legs never get a rest, because you know, riding a bike, you can cover a lot of miles with, especially with an e-bike, with minimal strain versus running or rollerblading. But even that, I'll be rollerblading or running, and next thing you know, someone will like stop, and I pick up movement really well, but I don't see someone standing there, and they'll have like a dog or something, dog leash, and it'll be like last second and they must think the craziest thing, because like I'll come within like inches of them, and I'll like last minute, luckily I have like a quick reaction time, and I'll like spin off them or something. And in my mind, I'm like, what's this idiot doing standing here in the middle of the road or the middle of the sidewalk? And then they're probably thinking, what's this idiot doing running basically into me as I'm like clearly standing here? So then I deal with things like that, where it's just like, who's to blame here if I had to like run into this person? And I kind of don't know what to do then. And people might think like, if you're blind, you shouldn't be running down the sidewalk. But it's just like, well, I have no other way to get around.
Yeah,
and
that's so good, dude. I've been wrestling with this a lot lately as well, because I'm in a new area and I'm learning it all over again. But just like Seneida would do in Salt Lake, that's how I would get around on my e-bikes as well. But those things are fucking dangerous, because it lulls you into a false sense of security, because you're not working very hard to go very far or very fast. And so sometimes I'll like get my phone out, because I can track my rides through my e-bike or through my phone that's connected to my e-bike, and it'll tell me your average speed was like 24 miles an hour. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like no wonder when I hit that street sign, it hurts so bad. It's always it's like curbs or people dropping things in the road, and those things that you don't like pay attention to. It's the small things. Like for the most part, if I stick my eyes straight up in the air, I can usually see a car that's parked on the side of the road. Sometimes not, just depending on the lighting, but like usually I do okay. But there are some times where there's things in the road that shouldn't be there, and you get lulled into a false sense of security, and you're going really fast and you've memorized the route. But things change so often in the real world. Someone just so happened to put a big road construction sign in the bike lane, and I just, you know, after work, you don't think about like staying on guard 24/7, and that was probably my bad. But before I knew it,
But
there was.
it's mentally exhausting to be on all the time like that.
Oh yeah.
So it's just like so much effort that you're putting into it. It's just like, okay, every single like intersection, every single spot that you could like have someone roll up that you have to pay attention to, you're like mentally keeping that tally.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, at the end of a long day, it makes sense, like a mental
Well,
slip, but
that right there,
costs you.
Seneida, is why I've been sometimes, and I go back and forth on like the whole like using of a cane thing, but there's times when I'm like traveling, especially if I'm carrying my hockey bag with me, because that's the thing, I'm really good at reacting or like stumbling, tripping when I'm on my own 2 feet. But once I have like a heavy bag on me, or even if I'm going somewhere and I have like my climbing backpack with like a tent and all that shit in it, I then, especially if I'm in places I don't know, I use a cane because it's so mentally taxing on you. And then all of a sudden when I have the cane out, it's just like, holy shit, like it's like here I have this really heavy bag on my shoulders, but it's like a weight's been lifted off of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yet I fight using that. And some of the things in my head are like, one day I could be running down to the YMCA, like literally running or rollerblading, and then the next day I'm going to walk with a cane. And I fight with this thing. What if I walk by someone that sees me every day and they're like, oh, what, today he's blind, tomorrow he's not blind, and the next day he's blind again? And then people will be like, well, what do you care what other people think? I'm like I guess I don't, like, or this could be a good time to educate someone that, you can see, but today you don't want to, exhaust yourself mentally trying to deal with what's in front of you, what's not in front of you. So like, this is the constant mental battle I have myself.
Yeah, I love it. Like it's what you're describing. I use it more than I don't nowadays. Even if it feels like it's just cumbersome and it's like something that takes up a hand that could be otherwise doing something like carrying a water bottle or whatever. It's like that one identification device is almost essential for me nowadays, because it does like it reduces all the conversations that you have to. It's like you're telling everybody your life story a dozen or 24 times a day just to live life.
That's got to be so frustrating. Like I don't have to use any sort of like visual aids because I can see just like the small cone. But like to listen to you guys and then also to like watch you guys have to actually use your phone to read menus, to read like what's on the screen. It's so much more. It's like putting your disability on full display. Like it's like you're naked in some ways.
It's
to the judgment of other people.
I just think it's so cool, like the differences. Like, of course, when I was a child and before I had lost my sight, I only had interaction with one blind man in my church growing up, and he was completely blind. So that was my vision of what I thought blindness was, which I would assume the majority of folks think that's what it's like. But the more that I've moved into this world of low vision and blindness, the more I realize that we are those people. Like the majority of people with vision loss have some kind of gray area blindness. And Seneida, I was curious. I think you had told me like your assistive technology is like anti what Chaz and I would want to use, because you're trying to fit everything into a small space, right?
Yeah. So whereas you guys are trying to like make it big enough for you to see across like the gap in the center of your vision, I'm trying to make the most out of like that little like cone that I have. And so the ideal scenario for me is a tiny screen that has like really like dense information on it, like cram as many words into that small space. And like really big monitors, or like honestly movie theaters are the worst for me because I can only see like a 16th of the screen. I'm turning my head trying to follow along with everything.
Well, and I noticed just the same as Chaz and I run into things that are right in front of us. You often run into things that are on your peripherals, of course.
Yeah, and even like right in the center too, because you're not seeing everything. Or if I'm looking just 5 degrees to the left or right of something that could be right in front of me, I'm not actually seeing the object.
Yeah.
And so I'm just as likely, out of just not being like facing the right spot, just as likely to hit a pole as you guys.
Seneida, have you ever used the cane before?
I've been using it more and more. I think so. Like you guys,
why is it
really the first? I think it's like the emotional part of it, where you have to. People grab your arm and try and help you, and like maybe like I didn't feel totally comfortable with, I think, accepting my sight loss just yet. And kind of like meeting you guys and meeting other blind people in the past like 2 years through paraclimbing, I've really kind of been more familiarized with, yeah, people use canes and it's normal. But me, it felt so foreign in my hand. Like I didn't know how to use it. And then taking it out, it felt like this big like expression, like everyone around you is going to flip a switch and start treating you differently. And to a degree, sometimes that does happen. But also, I think it's a little bit more welcome than it used to be. Like, I've been traveling for the past like 2 months, basically. I was in the Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia, and then went to Germany and then to Austria and then recently to Canada. And that's like a lot of airports. That's a lot of train stations and a lot of buses where people are moving around quickly and signages in different languages. And it's really confusing. And honestly, like taking out the cane is almost like not like a little like SOS, but sometimes people are just more willing to help you out. And I think when you change your perspective about like the people are offering you help because they want to like be helpful and be good people who help people who are going through the world in a different way than they are. And even if they don't understand how to actually help you best, they're trying. And so honestly, sometimes all it takes is just redirecting that person's care towards a way that's useful to you and saying, actually, I can see that sign, but could you actually direct me through this train station? I'm trying to find the exit and I don't know through all these people which way to go. And just something like that. I'm getting used to it. I'm getting used to accepting the help, but it is kind of strange at first, the way you do kind of have to put your full life story on display in order for people to help you out.
Well, I think that's really important, I think, to consider because, you're putting your full kind of life story on display, but it makes me think of going to the School for the Blind, and they were teaching us orientation and mobility. And they would always say, well, your best asset is advocating for yourself. But when you don't have a cane, you have to basically tell your life story verbally to everybody around you, no matter like, if you're like for an airport, for example, you're sitting on the plane, you don't want to wait for the meet and assist folks because usually they're late by an hour. And oftentimes I just like quest off by myself and get lost. And then I have to ask someone, where am I? Can you help me get to baggage and so on? And then they're like, why do you need help? You look like you're obviously a fit guy. You've got all these bags on you. What's wrong with you? It's like, oh, I'm blind. Oh, what is that like? But when you have the cane, it's almost novel. Like people interact with you different, like they're quick to offer assistance. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm advocating for myself passively. And then people come up and ask if I need help. And all I have to do is say, yes, I'm trying to get here. And there's no more like talking about it.
It's kind of like putting vulnerability like out there on display.
Yeah, it's humbling for sure.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a really like everybody does understand it. So like you're saying, you don't have to explain it to people. The average person will see that and have an immediate understanding, at least like basic understanding of like why this person is asking for help. As I mentioned before the call, here in Louisville, we have the American Printing House for the Blind, and we also have a School for the Blind. And so hearing you guys talk, I'm thinking like we actually probably had a little bit more of, as kids growing up in the city, had like a little bit more education of blind culture and blind people than most people. Like our crosswalks, even before this was like common, all the crosswalks would talk. And they all have Kentucky accents, which I do not know why that is, but it's awesome. So if you ever come, it'll be like walk sign, Main Street, walk sign, Jefferson Straight.
I'm straight.
Yeah, but it's awesome. But it was just kind of like there were, especially around this one area, Frankfurt Avenue, there are blind people walking into the coffee shops. You're kind of always looking like even more carefully on crosswalks. People will have like a dog. They may or may not have a cane. There may be one person with a cane, one person without. And that was like not uncommon to see that, or like that you could expect that someone would be blind and not with a cane. But I think that was probably like subconscious in our being raised here that we notice things like that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm probably just considering I grew up in Oklahoma. There, like the percentage of people with blindness in my area was very small. But like, just now I work in accessibility, and I know all these laws, and I know the statistics on everything. It's like, man, there's over it's 20% of our population. Globally, that's almost 2 billion people in the world that deal with a disability requiring some type of accessibility or assistive technology now. So I think it is increasing, whether it's just the population increasing or whether it's just the undue side effects of living in a fallen world.
And now it's talking about just things like crossing the street, everyday living. I do want to talk some about injury. And we've already kind of dabbled in this with the conversation thus far, but I think it's a really important thing to bring up because I think it would be a nice, simple narrative if, like, as paraclimbers, it's like you have this one condition and then you learn how to navigate it and then you kind of like move on through life. And it would be nice if it was that way, but that is unfortunately not the way it works because we are climbers and we are also just people. And so shit happens. And so you have your existing disability and then you have these injuries that can like layer on top of that. And we had kind of mentioned earlier, like the exhaustion that it takes. Sometimes it's not physical, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just mental of like having to constantly like do calculus to move through the world. So yeah, kind of take that as a conversation starter and run with it.
Thinking about, you said about injuries, and earlier we were talking about like mental exhaustion and just simple things like the approach and how much more energy it takes us with not being able to like see exactly every foot placement when I'm hiking somewhere. So early on, the amount of time I spent in a boot or on crutches because of me rolling my ankles was, I think, like the first like 2 years of me climbing. I was always battling some kind of ankle injury before I kind of strengthened my ankles, it seemed, and learned how to step on rocks and roots because I can't pick and choose or know when it's coming. Or if you're spending so much time and energy trying to figure out where that shit is, it's just very exhausting as well. So a lot of times I just pick a direction and walk straight for it and just kind of go with it. And whatever my foot lands on is where the foot is. And then I also fought using hiking sticks for the longest time. And those were like a saving grace with me. My biggest argument with that was, my girlfriend would be like, you get hiking sticks. And I'd be like, oh, I'm not an old man. I don't need hiking sticks. And I'd fight this. And there'd be times I'd be like crawling on my butt down certain areas. And I remember, I think it's probably more embarrassing maybe for her because people wouldn't understand why. And once like the slope would level out, I'd still be crawling. I remember once she was like, I'm getting you hiking sticks. People just passed us. And I'm literally like on my butt on flat ground. And I'm like, don't be ridiculous. And she's like, Chaz, like, stop and look at yourself right now. She's like, you're literally on your butt on flat ground with a backpack on and people are walking by you. And I kind of like a bit of a breakdown. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, I don't know why I'm doing this. And then the next day she got me hiking sticks. And then I started using them. Once I learned how to use them, I was like, holy shit, like, why did I fight this for so long? And then it got to the point where, especially if we were going to a crag that I've been to before, I'd be always waiting for my friends. And I'd be like, come on, guys, like, what the hell are you guys waiting for? And they'd be like, oh, like, sorry, we know your fancy hiking sticks. We can't keep up with you. And I laugh at, hear this thing I fought for so long, and it actually is benefiting me in so many different ways. That I guess the same thing with the cane. Maybe when I finally get to the point of like using the cane more often, I'm going to sit here and think to myself, it's probably just like the hiking sticks. I fought using it because I'm like, I don't need that. Turns out I did need it, or maybe I don't need it, but it would definitely benefit me. I just have to get over the ego. I'm hearing my speak right now. It's my ego that's hindering me from allowing myself to use certain things to assist me and not realizing how much benefit I will get from that.
Yes, it always comes back to the cane.
The cane. I gotta say though, Chaz, when you hike,
seriously,
you don't give a fuck. It is awesome. Like it's like you just walk forth through whatever is in front of you, and you're so good at just like wherever you set your foot, like you might adjust, but you just like keep going forward. I feel like I nitpick through a lot of like different things and it takes time, but you just kind of like trudge forward, and it is epic to witness.
Yeah, I just haul ass.
Yeah,
Dude,
dude.
yeah,
Well, and I had a
I
friend of
can
mine,
hardly keep up.
but again, like I used to, my first few years of living with blindness, I lived in a van and literally spent basically every day, or not like literally every day, because my girlfriend would work. I'd have to get out of the van at 7 a.m. And no matter where we were climbing, I would then spend the days, just learning how to like live life again, getting groceries and shit like that. Because even things like that, I'd be like, I don't want to get groceries. Like, do you know how hard that is for me? She'd be like, well, you have 8 hours to
Stores
figure
are
it
the
out.
worst.
Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, or she'd be like, or you can spend 8 hours and figure it out, or I can do it tonight when I'm done work, but then we can't go climbing tonight. And then, once I didn't learn how to redo things, it doesn't seem that bad anymore. And same with like hiking around. I would spend all these days, hiking and navigating around, that I got to the point now where the average person looks and can't even see that I can't see too well. But it's just like you miss the point of the struggle I went through for many years
Yeah.
of getting to this point. Like you don't understand the amount of work and effort I've put in to be able to move around the world like this now. Even walking on a sidewalk was really difficult for me at a time without stubbing my toes on little imperfections in the cement, and just like relearning how to like move my feet and step a little higher. Again, like, these are all like learned behaviors that I had to adjust over time. And then from then I now can run. I can almost trail run again. I can, yeah, like I was hiking with my sticks and shit. Like I just burn through, and if my foot does hit a rock or something slippery, I just kind of react in the moment. And once I've learned that I'm capable of doing all these things, I'm now confident that like I can just go anywhere and I'll deal with it on the fly.
That does make me think, we were talking about injury and then kind of the navigating side of blindness and stuff. I think people probably don't realize like the logistical nuances to like being a high performing climber with vision loss, because it's not necessarily just about like the climbing itself, because with tactics, with help from people around us, and just our own physical skill sets, we can pretty much do anything we set our minds to. But there are those things that are like the peripheral of getting to that point, like logistically trying to navigate rides, or getting to the crag, or if you want to go by yourself, getting dropped off at the trailhead and then you have to navigate to the crag, or those moments are pretty humbling for sure, because not only do people like see you out at the crag and you're like really far in the backcountry and you're like on your hands and feet trying to navigate, and it's like, oh, this is just what it takes for me to get here, dude. And then now it's project time, and so there's like this balance between like the physical effort of getting to whatever project you're sieging, or trying to figure out a way to get to the crag. And maybe you have your beta wired perfectly after a session and you had positive progress on the climb, and you then all of a sudden it's like logistically impossible to get a ride back there for another 2 weeks, and then you forget your beta.
Yeah.
And then it's like restarting the cycle all over again. So that's a pretty big challenge.
Well, that's why I think we need the electric cars. Like being independent and getting places is awful for us. Like, and I was really humbled and got to reflect on this with my recent surgery I just had, because there's times that I'm running somewhere, rollerblading somewhere, and I'm exhausted and thinking to myself like, man, this fucking sucks. Like I wish I could drive. And because I can look back on when I could drive and how easy it would be. And then now I have this hip surgery and I can barely walk, to the bathroom. And I'm sitting there. I remember like one morning I'm like making a coffee and I'm looking outside. I'm just like, man, I wish I could go for a run right now. And like I would do anything just for the ability to be able to run. And here I was thinking like, shit, like, 2 weeks prior to this, I was bitching about having to run somewhere. And now I'm just like, I want nothing more than to be able to run. So now I can look back on this when I am finally able to run again or rollerblade. And when I had that little voice in my head trying to tell me like, oh, it must have been nice when you could drive, I can be like, yeah, but it's also nice to be able to actually run somewhere and rollerblade somewhere and get around on my own 2 feet, because I am independent. I just have to do it differently. I mean, obviously I wish there was even more, but I kind of had to reflect on looking at the things I do have instead of focusing on the things I don't have, because that kind of helped me, deal with, and even now, like, it's still, like I said yesterday, it was the longest walk I'd been on since getting off crutches. And, I'm just happy that I'm progressing to the point that I was at, and hopefully past that, because it could always be a lot worse. And I got to experience that for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why, as para athletes or adaptive athletes, it's so important the way that this, especially climbing, I think, I want to say, like, feeds the ego in a good way. Like, it's really important for us that we maintain some semblance of confidence in ourselves and confidence and capability of our, like, my body can do, it may not be able to do this, that, and the third, but it can do this and this and this. And, like, I feel like it's, when I talk to people, we all say the same things of, like, we have these relationships with our bodies with we just need to, like, maintain some sense of capability. And when you're injured and you have multiple things at once, you just begin to feel so incapable. And it's like, sometimes maybe the ego needs a little something, in a good way, though.
I think I'm curious. Have you guys found that you need to be overqualified for the routes that you're attempting to, let's say, on site or flash? Like, I have found personally that in order for me to exceed in like a let's say an 80% flash level of, like, boulder sport climbing, that I need to be overqualified for that grade that I'm attempting to do. Have you guys found that to be true as well?
Yeah, for sure. Because you can't, plan out hold for hold what you're going to grab.
Yeah, the endurance needed as, like, a blind athlete, I think, is something that people definitely underestimate. Like, when you're watching paraclimbing and the blind climbers are on, like, all of those people, I mean, we only have 6 minutes on the wall. I think other people think of it as, like, wow, if I was on the wall for 6 minutes, that'd be exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about you guys. I get a little stressed about that time limit, because I'm like, I could spend all day on the wall probably. And it's just kind of like the way I've gotten used to climbing.
Totally. Well, and it's crazy too. It's like, I've taken a bit of a hiatus from, like, high performance climbing briefly here as I focus on, like, balancing life. But it's like, outside of that, I've noticed a precipitous drop off in any kind of climbing performance, because I don't have the ability to, like, sit there on a small grip and lock off for a minute and look for holds. The ability to stay in one position is very dependent on, like, a certain level of fitness.
There's something I will say. So I've recently been trad climbing a lot more to get ready for this Bugaboos trip that I just came back from.
Mm-hmm.
And I done, like, dabbled in trad in the past, but, like, this spring, like, it was just trad climbing, like, out there on cracks and, like, placing gear and all of these things that do take longer when you're climbing. And it was something that I didn't expect would be so, like, honestly, I was, like, pretty shocked how quickly I could progress with trad, because I think I just had a lot of, like, built-in practice holding, like, strains positions, or, like, having the endurance to stay on the wall for so long that I mean, was a blessing and a curse. Like, came off of a route one day and was like, oh, that was cool. And the person, Blaine, was like, that was 45 minutes. I was like, really? But then also, like, to have the just kind of, like, built-in patience that I think we have to sit and play with gear and plug it in and be able to keep climbing and be continuous and be consistent was something that from just how long blind climbers need to climb a route.
Yeah, there's, like, advantages for sure. Like, I found that when I'm trad climbing, it's almost always grabbing the first piece off my rack is the appropriate piece for the size that I'm attempting to insert it into. But finding that imperfection in the rock is a different story.
What also sucks when you're going to a crag for the first time, and maybe the description is like, look for shark tooth shaped rock on your right hand side, and you're just like, well, fuck, I can't do that. So
Yeah, it's like
I
all
then
of the information is visual.
things like that are really discouraging when you're like, I must be really shitty. This again, people don't tell these things to me, but my own head would be like, I'm not even contributing to the climbing party here because, I'm just like a pack
It's like
mule
I
that
didn't
keeps
drive
following along.
here. I can't help necessarily find the trail. I can't even necessarily like help find the route. So all of these like whispers in your ear that maybe no one around you actually like faults you for, but you just like wish like I want to be capable of being that person, of like leading the pack to where we're going to climb. And it's like that want to be able to be the group leader that like pits who you are and what you are capable against this person that is really difficult for you to actually be, because even if ideally you'd love to be the person who knows exactly where you're going and who brings the group to this route, it's not something that with the visual ability that you have you're necessarily capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're sitting there and you are capable of climbing, but your ego, or this person that you kind of think or wish you were, is being subjected to the limitations that visual impairment puts upon you.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it almost makes me feel like a
Funny-
bit of a prima donna sometimes, because it's like you show up, you're like, will you hang my draws? Like, I know I'm about to try this really fucking hard climb, but like, will you aid it so that I can know where the quick draws are or whatever? And then you're like doing all these like secretive things that no one knows about. You're like asking every single person at the crag what they see on the route that you're wanting to try, and you're like getting little tidbits of beta from them. Like, even if no one there has climbed it, the mass group effort of what they see on the wall, you're like taking little tidbits of information from. You're like, I'm going to use this, but I don't know where the bolts are. So like, will you help me like stick clip the first bolt and all these things?
Make me think as well, if I've been to a crag before and I'm like, say someone is going there for the first time, I just, as Seneida was saying something, I was like remembering how I'll be so excited, like a little dog being like, all right, here, follow me, because like I know where I'm going. And then when I get there, if I know what all the routes are, it's like finally I can be of use. And I'm like,
yeah,
banging off, this is that. And now I'm looking back, people are probably like, I don't care, like I didn't ask what all these climbs are, but because I can finally be useful and like tell you what route is what, how to get there, I'm just like finally excited that I can finally be of help, because every other time I have to basically, I want to be the spearhead of like, let's go and get somewhere and do this, but I can't because I have to follow someone who's reading the visual commands on like how to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be like, at this log, turn left, and trees grow, trees get cut down, vegetation is different. So it's really difficult to find certain crags when you can see completely fine, let alone someone like us trying to see things off of these visual cues.
I am always saying, like, the next time the Red River Gorge does a new guidebook, I need to help them because it could be so much better. We were just there on Sunday and we're reading these directions and it's like, take this second right. I'm like, what does right mean? Like, what if I, what is like, can we get some cardinal directions up in here? Like, why is this not better, even for fully sighted people? So my question is, how can we make it better? What are some things that would help visually impaired climbers? Like, what could make it better?
Well, on Mountain Project, and I was doing this for the longest time, is every climb will have like GPS, like show you where it is, but none of it's like actually entered in. So I was always like adding things, but I don't know how well it works. But because here we have a map and it's always showing you where the climb, and not everyone, but a lot of things, and people use Mountain Project all the time. This is just one of the many websites that you could use. And GPSs are so highly used nowadays. It's like, why can't these coordinates be like actually typed in to like, exact like longitude, latitude, so that we could type it into a GPS and, know if you're there or not. And even better, when someone could say track themselves. I've even thought of doing this myself, like getting to learn where certain crags are, walk it once, and then walk it back confidently and turn on like something that's dropping pins or like marking out my exact footsteps.
So I ran
Because
into a
people spend
couple
so
at
much time and energy.
just trying to find the climb. I ran into a couple at Red Rocks a couple of years ago that was working on a project. I think it was Climb On Maps, and they would walk like almost every approach trail to an area and like collect the GPS data from the trails and connect it to the crag so people could use that
Whoa,
to
cool.
find their way.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super cool, right? I think it would be cool. So now Mountain Project is part of Onyx, and Onyx is now they're taking like similar kind of GPS data with trail lines, so you can follow on your phone like where you are on the trail. If you could get almost like turn by turn navigation from your phone that utilizes that GPS information, like it's just a problem I have is I can't tell when a switchback actually turns. It'd be really cool if you were using that like trail data, if it would tell you when you're off the like off trail, and it would say like, oh, turn right, or like turn left, or continue on, or like when you get to the base of the crag, it says like what route you're standing in front of, because
Mhm.
that's the first thing you do when you're like with a guidebook or on Mountain Project is you walk up and you see the rock, and then you figure out, okay, what is the route directly in front of me. It would be cool if they could actually like put some of that information to use.
Yeah,
I,
that would be
I feel
sick.
like I feel like civilians aren't allowed to use accurate enough GPS as like the other holdback. Like I know that technology exists, but I feel like it's only available to the military because that's the thing. Like I'd want it to like the inch, like you're saying, Sinead, of if I'm going up a switchback, I don't want to go if I miss the turn by a foot, now I'm like off. Where
Yeah.
a lot of GPS, and I don't know the numbers, but I think it's only within like 10 or 15 feet of each, dot, we'll say.
Is that
Where
true for like a high performing Garmin or something like that? Like one of those mega expensive like backcountry GPSs?
I had
GPI?
seen again, I've had one before, and I dropped a bunch of pins to go back to find something, and I come back and I'm like, what the hell? Because I didn't actually pay attention to where I was. I'm dropping pins on a very expensive GPS, and it was within 10 to 15 feet. And I remember calling them, like complaining, and they're like, well, like, no, like that's, if you read the small print, like that's all it's to. Like there's all these waypoints, but they're not to the exact coordinate. That was a few years ago that I looked into this. So hopefully things have changed, because the way it was explained to me is, the technology's there, but it's only available to the military. Civilians can't have access to things like that.
Well, I guess we put this problem then out to the masses. Like, here's the problem that needs to be solved.
Well, I think what's interesting about like the Mountain Project thing specifically, the app is not accessible like inherently. It needs to be like completely remediated and audited by manual testers. And that's like, I have the fortune of working in digital accessibility, so I like understand the processes behind it. But sure, the app could be audited, remediated, and it would work way better for those of us using Zooming or VoiceOver or whatever the case may be, because it just is a messy app. But I think it's going to take more than just people within the low vision, blind, disabled communities making noise about this for there to actually be like robust change within our culture that views low vision, blindness, or any type of disability. Because there was a friend of mine, his name is Jennison Assumption. He's one of the like founders of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or GAD, and then he's the head of accessibility for LinkedIn, and he was on like a podcast talking about change within the low vision community, the blind community, and he was saying we can't do it alone. We have to change people's perspectives of what it means to interact with the world with low vision from the able-bodied perspective, because those are the people that ultimately are going to help like aid in this thing catching like wildfire and spreading. So low vision understanding is more ubiquitous.
Well, there's many things that happen in this world that are changed for people with disabilities that then directly impact able-bodied people in a very positive way. Like an example of that would be like a cutout in a curb and a sidewalk for someone with a wheelchair, and that helps parents that are pushing a stroller around. Where That's just one of many examples. But if all these things were added for us to be able to do easily, it would also benefit everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and having accurate GPS information is only going to do good things for rescues and for people, all kinds of people who get lost. It's not just climbers who get lost. Like it would make the wilderness, or not even wilderness, but just like some of these national forests and places where we have climbing safer.
Safer for everyone.
Yeah, safer for everyone. So, Justin, if someone from Mountain Project who is listening right now, like what would they do? Can they reach out to the company you work with? Like, what is step one to make that app better?
Sure. I mean, like there is best practice and there's like legal standards. So I guess I could just lean on the legal standards or the legal procedures to kind of start with. I mean, the first step is assessing where you even need to start, like what is accessible, what is not accessible. And instead of oftentimes testing every single page on the entire site, you would only want to test like the unique pages or the templated pages of each website so that it cascades across all pages. So you're not like overworking any one person, but it ultimately comes down to manual labor. People like to deploy widgets or AI to fix their accessibility needs for apps and websites and widgets. I don't know if y'all have ever used those like accessibility widgets, but they're like a small button that is installed onto the surface of a website that has a little disability icon. And it's like, if you're disabled, click me and I'll solve all your problems. And that shit, if I can do anything in my life, it'll be to standardize the use of these widgets, or they're also known as overlays, because they don't work. It provides a level of JavaScript over the top of HTML and CSS, and it doesn't address the broken code on the surface level, so that actually breaks the website further and makes it even more challenging, and it doesn't fix the problem anyway. So you want to avoid using those things, but really AI can only see about 30% of those issues. So it needs to be tested by someone like us three or somebody that is trained to look for those issues manually. And that's what the Department of Justice has said as well. Like best practice is manual testing. So you go through an assessment, see what needs to be done. You manually test it, you remediate it, you fix the code so it operates well with assistive technology. And then there's an ongoing monitoring phase where those individuals that do the testing circle back and they test it periodically and keep an eye on it, because things change, content gets added, updates to websites and apps happen. And so it can fall out of compliance. And so to stay on top of it, you need to be monitoring it closely. And then it's like, then there's the best practice where you could like encourage the community to actually write proper descriptions and not just like Boulder Bros getting on there and being like, bolts to chains. Okay, thanks. Like safety speaking, it would be really nice to know how many bolts I need here, or what the actual start of this route is, or like a decent description.
And are you allowed to say who you work for? Do you know? Are you allowed to say right? Okay.
Hey, yeah. Well, I'm not trying to sell, what we're doing on this podcast, but I just think like more holistically, this is stuff that I used to just complain and moan about all the time. Things aren't accessible. They don't work with my assistive technology. But now I have the ability to actually do something about it. So the company I work for, funny enough, is called Perspective Tester. So we're testing things from the perspective of low vision or blindness, or people using assistive technology.
And for like just a simpler fix, I'm wondering if you guys could weigh on like, what if trail signs were not meant to blend in, because so often they're made out of like natural wood, which is great because then it doesn't like mess with the natural environment so much. But like, how much would that help a low vision person if it
or painting the bolt hanger?
Oh, yeah, doing stuff like that, or like bright yellow bolt hanger. Is that like, would that go a long way, or like not so much?
At least that gives me an idea where to use my phone to read it or something. But then that's the argument too, is people are like, no, we want nature to look like nature. So there's the whole argument of this unnatural bright yellow sign halfway through the trail.
So I know where North America sits on like having very like brighter visual things in the natural environment is like very different than Europe. And actually, like last year, when Chaz and I we were in Switzerland, we went to a place called the Gaslisten. That was just, I mean, it's crazy in Europe what they have in terms of just crazy accessible sport climbing. But something that I'd never seen before is along their trails, they'll put like little green dots, like spray paint, onto onto the trails themselves, um, like red and white. And that's this trail. And as long as that you see a rock along like the ground that's got like the little red and white, you know that you're on the same trail that you've been on. Additionally, when you're on the route, so yeah, the top, the anchors, like when you're at the base, there'll be an arrow. Let's say you're on a multi-pitch, pointing to the direction of the route that the route's going to climb towards the anchor. So even if your first bolt is really off to the right, if the little like yellow arrow points to the left, you know that the trend to the next anchor is going to be leftward leaning.
That's cool.
And then on the rappels, they have a similar arrow that points to where the next rappel station is going to be. So I just thought that was like really interesting from a general usability and navigation standpoint. Like I always make sure someone else goes down to, like if we're doing multiple rappels, to find the anchors first, because that's something I'm particularly like bad at. And with the use of those arrows, like that's really useful for them. But also it kind of means if I'm rappelling, I could almost rely on using that feedback instead of exclusively just going down and scanning and not being sure, like, did I miss it? Am I in the wrong place? And I thought that was really cool. Another practice that I've seen there is they'll actually put the route names at the base of the rock. And I know that's a little controversial for like climbing in the United States, but I think that's just really great for making sure that people actually are getting on the route that they intend to, and not that they think they're getting on a 5.8, but actually it's a 5.10 or like a something harder. And so that's something that I think we've already seen like this region of the world using, that, you know, maybe if that starts to get adopted in the US, it's a little more subtle in some ways than trail signs, but it's a reassurance that you're kind of on the path to where you're going, lost in the woods.
I feel like people will argue back to that of like, yeah, like I'm not getting paid to bolt this route. No one's paying me to, because people will also be like, they should have added extra bolts here and this and that. And there's always like some, you know,
An extra bolt's like $15.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we're so grateful for places like Muir Valley, where the Adaptive Climbers Festival happens, right? Like they do so much work there, and it's not like they're making a profit on anything they're doing. And they do have the signs. They're little silver medallions, so you don't really even see it. It's not that obtrusive. You have to get close. And I think you could feel it too, like if you run your hand across it. But clearly there's a lot more to talk about here. I do want to be conscious of all of our time. Like the conversation is so good. We've talked for longer than I thought we would. There's one other thing I do want to ask you guys about before I let you go, though. And it's bringing us back indoors. I feel like we have to talk about the Paralympics.
Yeah, this is something I've been excited to talk about too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we can't leave this conversation without talking about that. So as long as everyone has like 10, 15 more minutes, I feel like we got to jump into that. Okay.
Well, my question is, do you guys think being B2 athletes and me being a B3, for those that don't know what that is, in blind climbing, there's 3 categories: B1 being completely blind, B2 having 5% sight, B3 having 10% sight. So then there's only going to be so many medals that can be awarded in the Paralympics. They still haven't announced what categories, let alone how many medals they're going to have to give out. So is blind climbing going to be in the Paralympics? If so, will the 3 of us be allowed to compete in the Olympics?
I do have a pretty interesting prediction for what I think is going to happen.
Blindfold for all.
Exactly. I've actually written like a thesis to the IFSC in the past about like the wanting to avoid aggregation within the visually impaired category, because we train with what vision we have left, and our sight guides get used to calling for us with a particular style of vision loss. So it's like just completely different. But medals are only there's only so many medals to give out. Paraclimbing already is a massive effort because there's so many disabilities, and you have male and female for each disability. And so there's only going to be so many medals to give out. So I have a strong feeling that they're going to probably only do one level of visually impaired climbing, and it's going to be B1, and we'll all be blindfolded for it.
But then do you
So I
think,
was
so I know, sorry to interrupt you, Seneida, so like goalball is a Paralympic sport. B1, B2, B3 athletes can compete in it, and everyone gets blindfolded. But then blind football, North America soccer, you all get blindfolded, but you can only be a B1 to qualify to make the national team and enter the Paralympics. So just because it's not across the board the same for every sport is my only worry. I mean, I hope that they follow suit with a sport like goalball and allow all athletes to compete while being blindfolded, because it sucks to be like, yeah, Justin, you're blind, you have 5% of your sight left, but you're not quite disabled enough to actually compete at like the highest level possible.
Mm-hmm.
exclusivity for the sake of inclusivity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the main fear, and I don't even know if it's a fear, it's just speculative as to what I think the IFSC and the Olympic committees will decide. Because I think for people like us, like if you were to just plop us in a group of people, I don't know if we were so obvious to be noticed as a blind person. But people with leg amputations or arm amputations that are seated or whatever, that's very obvious. And so I do think that there's a component of marketing certain types of disabilities because it's so obvious. It's easy for people to understand. But whenever you're someone in this like gray area of vision loss, it's hard for people, I think, to qualify or conceptualize what you're dealing with. And I think the ultimate way for them to highlight that is a blindfold. So if you see someone like that looks proper blind, all of a sudden it changes things.
It's like the cane.
Well, my other suggestion to them was miking us. So like, I know Sena is the company that makes the headsets that I wear. They also make this other technology that allows whatever's being said through the headsets to be transmitted to a recording device, like a GoPro or another, like a video camera. And I'd actually send this to the IFSC as a suggestion that they could, because I know they've done this in the past, not IFSC, but I know USA Nationals, they'll mic the caller. And then they were joking that they can't mic someone like myself because of maybe language I would use while on the wall. But my suggestion is they mic both climber and caller, because that way the viewers can watch and listen to what's being said through climber and caller on the ground while the climb is happening.
And they could have the extra drama of feeling like involved, because I feel like there's this phenomenon of people watching Olympic sports and saying, oh, I could do that. Like, I think like with the blind category, you could almost like, people have the opportunity to think like, oh, if I were in that climber shoes, they also have the opportunity to think, what if I were the caller? I could be giving this person like different directions than what they're actually receiving.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, I think that's something that could definitely play into making the blind category potentially like a more marketable or like a more interesting or empathetic sport for people.
What I think so exciting about, to your point about like the differences between visually impaired or VI or the B category versus all the rest, including able-bodied categories, we are the only team sport in climbing. And that is really special to think about. Like, there's a component of problem solving with another person and your sight guide, and your sight guide is holding a lot of responsibility as to the success of their athlete. But I was having this conversation with one of like a pretty well-known coach in the industry, and she was like, I'm actually quite jealous of sight guides competing with athletes on a World Cup level, because it's a component that she wishes was ubiquitous across all of climbing. Like, the idea of raising the difficulty level of all climbing, even in competition, and having a coach work hand in hand with the athlete to solve a more complex climb is way more interesting to them than just having a athlete try and do something on their own and the coach can't interact at all. And then it goes back to even like the fundamental movement of the lines in competition. Like there's no dynos, no dynamic moves, anything like that. It's resistance climbing, and it's really freaking complicated the entire way. And they're making it complicated for the site guides now. So it's like more of a pure style of climbing, whereas I think everything's becoming more parkour style.
It's closer to outdoor climbing.
Yeah.
In all those ways that you just described, but also in the partnership, which I actually haven't thought about before, but like that's the thing that you never get away from in outdoor climbing, unless it's bouldering, I guess. But you don't get that at all in the indoor competitions, and how you're describing it. Like it's totally closer to outdoor climbing. The partnership is crucial.
Oh yeah.
I think it's something like the IFSC has always been challenged to understand. Like I feel like in general, the callers and the site guides don't get the respect or the just the acknowledgement of like getting a team jersey or jacket, or even being like named at ceremonies. Like they give a climber an advantage or a disadvantage depending on how good they are at providing information to the climber. Like you can have the strongest climber, but if you have a site guide who's providing data that's not useful or not timed well or any number of things, like that's going to hold the climber back from actually climbing at the full capability that they can. And I've yet to see the IFSC like at the Bern paraclimbing championship, they did provide the callers with medals, but they don't name them. They don't say for second place, here's so-and-so and their site guide who was there with them every single move of the route. Like they're not given that acknowledgement. And so where I think it's a really good opportunity for growth in the future, it's still like a weakness of something that isn't being fully recognized currently. And so a lot of national teams don't provide financial, like they don't provide any financial support for the blind climbers who are required or need to have a site guide at competition to actually be able to transport a second person with them.
Preach.
And so, yeah, it's double the cost. Like, let's be honest, like being a paraclimber and doing competitions is expensive. Like you get some financial benefit from your national federation. But if you're a blind climber, your federation doesn't typically cover the flight of your site guide. And so it's up to either the site guide to split the costs with you or you as the athlete to cover their costs. And so it makes it that much less accessible for people to be a blind paraclimber simply on account of like the financial side of things.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm glad you touched on that because that's like one of the biggest things I think that is like I've had unfortunately last year and the year prior financially I wasn't at liberty to travel like I had in the past, and it was a lot to do with like trying to figure out how to support two people on a World Cup circuit or whatever. And then it goes right back into what you're saying. It's like you train with your site guide, you develop such a strong relationship. Yeah. It's like if someone else steps in, usually the hope would be that you can find someone that's a high performing athlete themselves or a coach or a route setter that can step in and help with that stuff. But if you're forced to, and this is not to be disrespectful in any type of way, but if you're climbing at a certain level, you want to make sure that that person is at or above your level so that they can help you be as efficient as possible.
Yeah. Like I was very fortunate in the past where I would use Alana, who would be competing in the same cities as me. So I didn't have to thankfully pay for her to fly there or stay there because she would be in a same city basically competing for herself. So I was very lucky to benefit from that because now that she's retired, I think of that now, for me to get a caller to go somewhere, that's now going to like come out of my pocket because in Canada we don't get any funding for ourselves to go to competitions, let alone funding for them for a caller as well. So I haven't put too much thought into that, but moving forward. And like you were saying, Justin, like I've been very fortunate where, I had, Alana and Chaz as my callers, and they're, two of the top women who climb in Canada, and they both climb.
Just touching on that. Chaz
Way
has
above
had an Olympian calling for him in competitions. He's had Canadian national team member and Olympian Alana Yip calling for him. And then this season he had one of the route setters who was working at the Salt Lake World Cup. And I think she did a setting clinic in preparation for the Olympics. So Chaz has had, I think, some of the two most qualified people in the entire sport to call for him recently, which is just something to.
Yeah, and like to touch on what we were saying about the callers, they should be on the podiums with us, because I wouldn't get anywhere near as high as I do without their guidance, because they can, even if I could see, I wouldn't be able to read a route to the level that they do. So I'm very fortunate, very grateful that I have these women take time out of their days, because they're also volunteering their time to spend, days, not only like say in the training aspect of climbing, but during the competitions, we have to say sit in isolation for the day. So now this person's taken a whole day out of their life just to sit there, just to call for me for, up to 6 minutes. So people don't consider that. And then for them not to be acknowledged at all, kind of sucks, because like we earn this together. Sure, I was on the wall, but you're on the ground telling me what to do. And without your support and guidance, I wouldn't have been able to do anything I just did.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to end the conversation, because we're bringing it back to focusing on the partnership in climbing, the collaboration of climbing. Climbing is a collaborative sport, and this podcast is meant to be a collaborative podcast. And that was the whole idea about bringing all three of you on here together, that now is really when we want to focus on the collaboration in climbing and turn this podcast back to the community for anybody else who kind of wants to jump in now and take this on as the host. So you guys have really like led perfectly into a nice way to kind of wrap up this interview and this series.
Sick. That's awesome. I'm glad it was what you hoped for.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for starting it.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope that I get to report on all of you and all of your callers in 2028.
Heck yeah.
Same.
Thanks, Emily.
You've been listening to Everybody Climbs. I'm your host and adaptive sports journalist, Emily Chen-Newton. You can reach out to me about the show or other adaptive sports happenings with the Instagram handle EveryBD That's every, then the letter B, the letter D, Climbs on Instagram. We've been presenting this podcast across Plugtone audio platforms with the help of Chris Hampton and Mario Stanley. Truly could not have made it happen without those guys. Thank you so much. And as we've said from the beginning, this is a collaborative series, so I'm now taking a step back to make room for another individual or team to take over the series. If you're interested in being that someone, reach out on Instagram and let's see what we can make happen. That's all for now. Well, at least from me for now. Climb on, climb strong, and remember, every body climbs.